Imagine this. It's 2 a.m., and you're driving down an empty moonlit highway. The hum of your engine is the only sound, the road stretching endlessly into the darkness. Your phone has no signal, and the radio crackles with static. Then, out of the corner of your eye, you see something, a figure standing by the roadside, motionless, illuminated by your headlights. You slow down, unsure if it's real or a trick of the light. But as you pass, the figure turns, and you realize it's already watching you. What would you do if you couldn't drive fast enough to escape? Jack loved long drives. They cleared his mind and gave him space to think. On a crisp autumn night, he decided to take the scenic route back from a friend's party in upstate New York. The road was empty, the sky a pitch-black canvas dotted with stars. Around 1 a.m., Jack's fuel gauge dipped dangerously close to empty. Cursing himself for not filling up earlier, he scanned the road ahead for signs of a gas station. Relief washed over him when he saw a faded sign. Rest stop, 2 miles. Pulling into the lot, Jack noticed how eerily deserted it was. The building was old, its paint peeling and windows clouded with grime. A dim fluorescent light flickered above the entrance, casting erratic shadows across the cracked asphalt. Inside, the rest stop was deathly silent. The aisles were empty, and the shelves were sparsely stocked with dusty bags of chips and expired candy. A lone clerk sat behind the counter, his face obscured by the brim of his baseball cap. "Gas pump still working?" Jack asked, trying to mask his unease. The clerk nodded, but didn't speak. Jack paid for his gas and stepped outside. The cold air bit at his skin as he filled his tank, glancing nervously over his shoulder at the empty road. As he replaced the nozzle, he heard it. A faint cry, like a child calling for help. He froze, straining to hear. The cry came again, louder this time, echoing from the woods behind the rest stop. "Hello?" he called out, his voice shaky. The crying continued, drawing him closer to the tree line. Against his better judgment, Jack grabbed his flashlight from the car and ventured into the woods. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating twisted branches and scattered leaves. The cries grew louder, more desperate, leading him deeper into the forest. "Where are you?" he shouted. Suddenly, the crying stopped. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of Jack's own breathing. He turned in a slow circle, his flashlight revealing nothing but trees. Then he heard it. Laughter. Low, guttural, and far too close. Jack spun around, the light landing on a figure crouched between 2 trees. It was a man, his face painted like a clown, his clothes tattered and stained. He grinned, baring yellowed teeth, and raised a finger to his lips. Jack stumbled back, his heart hammering. He turned to run, but another figure stepped out from the shadows. A woman this time, her painted smile wide and sinister. More figures emerged, surrounding him, their laughter growing louder. Desperate, Jack bolted, zigzagging through the woods. The flashlight bounced in his hand as he sprinted, the sound of footsteps closing in behind him. He burst out onto the road, lungs burning, and dove into his car. Fumbling with the keys, he managed to start the engine just as one of the figures slammed a hand against the driver's side window. Jack didn't look back as he sped away, his tires screeching on the pavement. When he reached the nearest town, he stopped at a well-lit gas station and called the police. They searched the rest stop and the surrounding woods but found nothing. No figures, no evidence, not even footprints. A few days later, Jack stumbled upon an article online. It detailed a string of disappearances over the years, all linked to that same rest stop. Each victim had last been seen stopping there late at night. None had ever been found. It was nearing midnight when Vanessa's shift at the hospital ended. Exhausted from her 12-hour day, she climbed into her car and began the hour-long drive home through the dark, winding back roads of rural Maine. Fog clung to the ground, and the only sound was the hum of her engine and the occasional hoot of an owl. She was halfway home when she spotted a figure on the side of the road, barely visible in the glow of her headlights. A woman stood there, waving frantically, her face pale and desperate. Vanessa hesitated but pulled over, lowering her window slightly. "Are you okay?" she asked. The woman nodded quickly. "Please, I need help. My car broke down and my phone's dead. Can you give me a ride?" Vanessa debated for a moment. The woman seemed harmless, shivering in the cold, her voice trembling. "All right, hop in." The woman climbed into the back seat, clutching a small purse tightly to her chest. Vanessa noticed that her clothes were strange, outdated, as if they were from decades ago, but she brushed it off as a quirk. As they drove, the woman remained silent, staring out the window. Vanessa tried to make conversation, but her passenger only responded with curt nods or single words. The silence grew heavy, and the longer they drove, the more Vanessa felt an inexplicable unease. "Where exactly are you headed?" she finally asked. The woman gave her a vague address, somewhere near the town's edge. Vanessa realized it was a sparsely populated area, surrounded by dense woods. A chill ran down her spine, but she told herself not to overthink it. Minutes later, Vanessa's phone buzzed with a notification. Glancing down briefly, she saw it was from her roommate. "Where are you?" "A woman just knocked on the door asking for you. She said she'd meet you on the road." Vanessa's stomach flipped. She glanced at the rearview mirror, and her blood ran cold. The back seat was empty. The car swerved slightly as panic gripped her. She pulled over, frantically looking around, but the woman was gone. The door hadn't opened, and there was no sign anyone had ever been there. Terrified, Vanessa sped home. When she arrived, her roommate met her at the door, pale and shaken. "That woman. She kept asking when you'd be here. She said she had to see you again." Vanessa spent the night sleepless, every creak of the house setting her nerves on edge. The next morning, she searched online for any clues about the woman. She found an old news article detailing a young woman's disappearance decades ago, a woman who matched her passenger's description exactly. She had been last seen hitchhiking near the very road Vanessa had driven that night. It was close to midnight when Tara left her best friend's wedding reception. The festivities had been fun, but exhaustion hit her hard. She had a long drive ahead through a remote stretch of highway in Northern California, where cell service was spotty and the roads rarely saw more than a handful of cars at night. The moonlight lit the empty road, casting eerie shadows from the looming pines. Tara rolled down the window to let in the cool night air, hoping it would help her stay awake. That's when she first noticed it, a faint thunk coming from behind her car. It was rhythmic, soft at first, but persistent. Tara frowned. She pulled over at the next clearing, stepping out into the cold. The night was eerily quiet, save for the gentle rustling of trees. She walked around the car, checking the tires and the bumper. Everything looked fine. With a shrug, she got back in and continued driving. But the sound returned, louder this time, as if someone was pounding softly from inside the trunk. Her grip tightened on the wheel. Every horror movie she'd ever watched flashed through her mind. Was it a branch caught underneath? Or something worse? Heart pounding, she pulled over again, this time reaching for her phone to use as a flashlight. The trunk was locked, and she hesitated before opening it, dread pooling in her stomach. With a shaky breath, she popped it open. Empty. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. Just as she closed the trunk, a low voice whispered from the darkness, "Don't look behind you." Tara froze. Her breath hitched as cold sweat prickled her neck. The voice had been so close, impossibly close. She spun around, but there was no one there, just the dark forest, silent and still. Terrified, she scrambled back into her car, locking the doors. Her hands trembled as she started the engine and sped down the road. The pounding in the trunk grew louder and more erratic. She turned up the radio, hoping to drown it out, but it didn't help. Ahead, she saw the glow of a gas station, a lone beacon in the darkness. She pulled in, desperate for light and safety. The clerk, an older man with a scruffy beard, watched curiously as she stumbled inside. "Something's wrong with my car," she blurted out, still shaking. "Can you check the trunk, please?" The man nodded and grabbed a flashlight. Together, they walked to the car. He opened the trunk, shining the light inside. Empty again. "You sure you're not imagining it?" he asked, his tone more skeptical than concerned. Tara was about to respond when the man's flashlight flickered, and then went out. In the brief moment of darkness, she heard it again. The voice, now right beside her ear. "You shouldn't have stopped." She screamed, spinning around, but there was nothing there. The clerk looked at her like she was crazy. Tara didn't wait. She jumped into her car and drove off, never stopping, even when the pounding grew deafening. By the time she reached her apartment, the sound had stopped, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had been with her the entire drive. The next morning, she found scratches on the inside of her trunk, as if someone, or something, had been trying to claw its way out. Liam was on his way home from a late shift, the rural Virginia roads empty under a starless sky. He knew the route by heart, Route 17 all the way through. But that night, just past a familiar diner, he noticed something strange, a detour sign pointing to an unmarked dirt road. He didn't remember seeing it before. Maybe it was new construction. With a sigh, he turned onto the detour. The road was rough, the headlights cutting through thick fog. His GPS lost signal almost immediately, leaving him to navigate blindly. As the minutes ticked by, Liam realized he hadn't seen any other cars or signs of life. The road seemed endless, twisting deeper into an unbroken forest. Anxiety gnawed at him, and he considered turning back, but the road was too narrow for a U-turn. Suddenly, his headlights caught movement, a figure standing in the middle of the road. Liam slammed on the brakes, his tires screeching as he came to a stop. It was a young woman in a tattered dress, her long hair matted with dirt. She stared at him, her face pale and expressionless. Before Liam could react, she raised an arm and pointed into the woods. "What the hell?" he muttered, rolling down the window. "Do you need help?" The woman didn't answer. She just kept pointing, her eyes hollow and empty. Against his better judgment, Liam stepped out of the car. The air was colder than it should have been, carrying a faint metallic smell. He followed the woman's gaze into the trees, his flashlight barely piercing the darkness. "Hello?" he called out. A rustling sound came from ahead. He moved closer, his heart pounding. Then he saw it, a row of crosses hammered into the ground, each one bearing a crude wooden plaque with a name scrawled on it. The names were barely legible, but Liam froze when he recognized one. His own name. Terror gripped him as he stumbled back toward his car. The woman was gone, and the road was now pitch black. He fumbled with the door, throwing himself into the driver's seat and locking it. As he started the engine, the radio crackled to life. A distorted voice whispered his name, over and over. Liam, you shouldn't be here." Panicking, he hit the gas, speeding down the road. The voice on the radio grew louder, until it wasn't just a whisper, it was screaming. Liam slammed the power button, but the radio wouldn't turn off. The headlights flickered, and he could swear he saw shadowy figures darting between the trees. Finally, the road widened, and he skidded back onto the main highway. The voice stopped. The radio was silent. Everything was normal again. Shaking, Liam drove straight home. He didn't sleep that night, and when the sun finally rose, he retraced his route. The detour sign was gone, and the dirt road wasn't there. It was as if it had never existed. Years later, he learned about the area's dark history. A serial killer in the 1970s who had buried victims in the woods off Route 17. Their graves were never officially found, but locals whispered about a ghost road that appeared to lost travelers, leading them to the killer's unmarked cemetery. Liam never drove that way again.